Lauren's soft panting sound echoed through the stable. Hidden just outside the partially open stall, I felt my heart begin to race, a knot tightening in my stomach. The scene unfolding in front of me was both mesmerizing and unsettling. I clenched my hands together, torn between the urge to leave and the irresistible pull of curiosity. Inside the stable, the horse shook its mane vigorously, and Lauren's voice took on a higher, almost crying tone. Her boyfriend, Ethan, stood towering over her, easily 2 heads taller. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, exposing his muscular arms that flexed with every movement. I had to admit, he was the kind of man who could command attention without saying a word. "Baby, just one more time," Ethan breathed, his voice deep and heavy with lingering desire. His body was still tense, clearly not satisfied yet. Lauren, however, was trembling, her voice shaky as she pleaded, "No, please. Someone might see us, and I really can't take it anymore." Her words stirred something in me, something I wasn't proud of. I knew Lauren had been dating Ethan for over 6 months, but she'd complained to me more than once that their relationship was overwhelming. Ethan was insatiable, always craving more excitement, more intensity, and Lauren often confided in me that it left her exhausted. She even mentioned using ointment to relieve the discomfort after particularly rough sessions. She would laugh it off, but I could tell she wasn't joking. At first, I thought she was just bragging, playing the part of the reluctant lover in what I assumed was a passionate romance. But today, watching them, hearing the way she begged for a reprieve, I realized that Lauren wasn't exaggerating. Ethan really did have an almost unrelenting energy. The way he handled her, the way his body moved with hers, made me swallow hard. I felt a sudden, sharp twinge of jealousy, a realization that my own boyfriend couldn't compare, not even close. A small, absurd part of me wanted to experience what Lauren was feeling. It was a thought I quickly tried to push away, ashamed that it had even crossed my mind. She was my best friend, after all. How could I even entertain such an idea? When they finally emerged from the stable, I quickly composed myself, making sure to appear as nonchalant as possible. I was dressed in a sharp riding outfit, tight enough to show off my figure, but practical for the day ahead. Lauren's face lit up as soon as she saw me. "Anna, you look incredible," she exclaimed, her eyes glinting with mischief as she circled me, inspecting my outfit from all angles. "Seriously? You pull off that riding gear like no one else." Before I could even respond, Lauren playfully grabbed my arm and pulled me toward Ethan, who was wiping sweat from his brow. "What do you think, Ethan? Doesn't she look amazing?" Her tone was light, teasing, completely oblivious to the tension I felt inside. Ethan's gaze slowly moved over me, from my head down to my legs, lingering just a little too long. His eyes were dark, full of something that made my pulse quicken. He didn't say much, just gave a small smirk and nodded, but the way he looked at me, it was as if he could see right through me, like he knew exactly what I was thinking. My heart thudded against my ribcage. I tightened my grip on the reins in my hand, feeling a wave of nervous energy wash over me. What was I thinking? He was Lauren's boyfriend. I needed to get my mind out of the gutter fast. To break the awkwardness, I quickly blurted, could you help me find a riding instructor? I'm not exactly an expert on horses." My voice came out higher than I intended, and I forced a laugh to cover the embarrassment. Ethan chuckled, but before he could respond, Lauren chimed in. "Oh, don't worry about that. Ethan can teach you." She grinned widely, clearly pleased with her suggestion. My stomach dropped. The idea of spending time alone with Ethan, so close to him, made my palms sweat. "Oh no, that's really not necessary," I stammered, but Lauren was already waving away my concerns, completely ignoring the tension that was building between Ethan and me. "It's no trouble," Ethan said, his voice low and smooth. "I don't mind at all." My face flushed. Before I knew it, Lauren was pushing me toward a horse, insisting that I climb on. I couldn't back out now, not without looking ridiculous. With a shaky breath, I mounted the horse, trying to ignore the way my body felt suddenly out of control. Moments later, Ethan was right behind me, his strong arms reaching around me to take the reins. My back was pressed against his chest, and I could feel the heat radiating off him. His breath was warm against my ear, sending shivers down my spine. I couldn't focus. Every movement, every shift of the horse beneath me, made me painfully aware of how close we were. "Relax," Ethan's voice rumbled in my ear. "You're too tense. Just let your legs loosen up." I tried to do as he said, but my body refused to cooperate. I could feel his hands brushing lightly against my thighs as he adjusted my position on the horse. My mind raced back to the image of him and Lauren in the stable, and I bit my lip hard, trying to keep my thoughts in check. The horse started to move, and I nearly lost my balance. Ethan's grip on me tightened, his arms securing me in place. The sensation of being held so firmly made my breath hitch. I didn't know how long I could keep pretending that everything was normal. The horse's steady rhythm beneath us was both calming and unnerving. Every gentle jolt made me hyper-aware of Ethan's body pressing against mine, his hands lightly brushing my sides as he held the reins. I tried to focus on the path ahead, but my mind kept drifting back to the warmth of his chest against my back, the firmness of his arms as they surrounded me. My heart raced, each beat thudding louder in my ears as the minutes ticked by. I told myself to relax, to stop overthinking, but it was impossible. The physical proximity between us was overwhelming. I could feel the tension coiling in the air, every breath we took, sinking in a way that made it impossible to ignore. Ethan's voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "You're still too stiff, Anna. You need to loosen up." His words sent a shiver down my spine, but I forced myself to nod, trying to follow his instructions. I shifted in the saddle, letting my legs hang a bit more loosely, but the movement only made me more aware of the pressure between us. My back pressed harder into his chest, and I could feel his breath quicken just slightly. In a futile attempt to break the growing tension, I asked, "How long have you been riding?" My voice came out shaky, betraying my effort to appear calm. Ethan's chuckle was deep, vibrating through me. "Since I was a kid. My family has always been into horses." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We rode in silence for a few more moments, the only sound the soft clopping of the horse's hooves on the trail and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. But the silence only seemed to magnify the tension between us, every minute spent together building on the unspoken energy that had been simmering since that morning. As we reached a slight incline in the trail, the horse slowed its movements, causing my body to press even closer to Ethan's. His arms tightened slightly around me, steadying me as we moved uphill. The touch was innocent enough, but it sent a thrill through me that I couldn't ignore. "I got you," he murmured in my ear, and I could feel the heat rising in my face. By the time we reached the top of the hill, I was a mess of tangled emotions. I dismounted clumsily, my legs weak from both the ride and the swirling confusion in my mind. Ethan was quick to help me, his hands firm on my waist as he guided me down. For a moment, we stood close to close. I could feel his breath on my skin, the warmth of his body radiating between us. My heart pounded in my chest, and I had to remind myself to breathe. Ethan didn't move, his eyes locked on mine with a look that sent a wave of heat through me. Before either of us could say anything, Lauren's voice broke through the tension, her laughter echoing from a few yards away. "Hey, you two, come look at this view." I quickly stepped away from Ethan, my face flushed as I turned to follow Lauren. Ethan's hand lingered on my waist for just a second longer than necessary before he finally let go, and I felt an odd mix of relief and disappointment. We stood at the edge of the hill, looking out over the expansive landscape, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. It was beautiful, but my mind was elsewhere. All I could think about was the way Ethan's touch had made my skin tingle, the way his presence seemed to pull me in even when I knew I should resist. Lauren was oblivious, her attention fully focused on the view. "Isn't this amazing?" she said, her voice full of awe. "We should come up here more often." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, it's beautiful." But even as I said the words, my thoughts were far from the sunset. I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan, about the way he looked at me, the way he made me feel things I had no business feeling. Guilt gnawed at me, but it was a dull ache compared to the intensity of the desire that was slowly taking hold. The days that followed were a blur of conflicting emotions. I tried to push away the thoughts of Ethan, tried to convince myself that what I was feeling was wrong, that it would pass. But every time I saw him, the tension between us grew stronger, more undeniable. Lauren remained blissfully unaware, laughing and joking with Ethan as if nothing had changed. But I could see it in the way he looked at me, the subtle glances when he thought no one was watching. I could feel it in the way his hand would brush against mine just a little too long when we passed each other, or the way his body seemed to find reasons to be close to mine. One evening, after another long day at the stables, Lauren suggested we all have dinner together. She had a few too many glasses of wine and ended up falling asleep on the couch, leaving Ethan and me alone to clean up. The house was quiet, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound as we worked in the kitchen. I tried to focus on the dishes, but the awareness of Ethan standing just a few feet away made my heart race. Every movement felt charged, every glance filled with something unspoken. I could feel him watching me as I scrubbed a plate, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. I didn't know how much longer I could take it. When I finally set the last dish in the drying rack, I turned around to find Ethan standing closer than I expected. His eyes were dark, focused on me with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. "Anna," he said softly, his voice low and rough. My breath caught in my throat. I should have stepped away, should have said something to break the moment, but I couldn't. I was frozen, trapped between the guilt that gnawed at me and the desire that had been building inside me for days. Ethan took a step closer, his hand reaching out to brush a stray piece of hair behind my ear. His fingers lingered on my skin, and I felt my resolve crumbling. I opened my mouth to say something, anything to stop what was happening, but no words came out. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, my heart pounding in my chest. He moved even closer, his breath warm against my cheek. "We need to stop this," I whispered, but the words lacked conviction. Even as I said them, I knew I didn't mean it. Ethan's lips brushed against mine, so lightly at first that I wasn't sure if it was real. But then he kissed me fully, and all the guilt, all the hesitation, melted away in the heat of the moment. His hand slid down to my waist, pulling me closer, and I felt myself give in completely. Time seemed to stop as we stood there, lost in the intensity of the kiss. It wasn't until we broke apart, breathless, that reality came crashing back. I stumbled back, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. "I can't," I whispered, shaking my head. "This is wrong." Ethan's expression softened, but there was no regret in his eyes. "You can't deny it, Anna. There's something here between us. You feel it too." I didn't respond, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on me. I needed to get out of there, needed to clear my head before I did something I couldn't take back. Without another word, I turned and left the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest as I fled the temptation. I knew I wouldn't be able to resist for much longer. I spent the rest of the evening tossing and turning in bed, unable to quiet the turmoil in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel Ethan's hands on me, the warmth of his breath, the way his lips felt against mine. My body still tingled from the memory, even as guilt gnawed at me, twisting my stomach into knots. What had I done? Lauren was my best friend, and yet I had crossed a line I never thought I would. I betrayed her trust, and worse, I didn't know if I regretted it. There was no denying the pull between Ethan and me, no ignoring the chemistry that seemed to crackle every time we were near each other. But that didn't make it right. No matter how much my heart raced when I thought of him, I couldn't justify what had happened. I needed to stay away from him, needed to remind myself of the person I used to be before all of this started. I wasn't the kind of person who hurt her friends. I wasn't someone who let lust cloud her judgment. But then again, if that were true, why couldn't I stop thinking about him? The next morning, I avoided Ethan completely. I told Lauren I wasn't feeling well and spent most of the day alone in my room, trying to sort through the tangled mess of emotions swirling inside me. I couldn't face him, not yet. I wasn't ready to confront whatever this was between us. I wasn't ready to face the consequences. Later that afternoon, Lauren came knocking on my door, her usual cheerful self. "Anna, you've been cooped up all day. Come out with us. We're going to the stables again." I hesitated, but the last thing I wanted was to raise her suspicions. "Sure, I'll be down in a minute," I said, forcing a smile as she bounded away, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. When I arrived at the stables, Ethan was already there, adjusting one of the saddles. His eyes met mine the moment I stepped into the barn, and I felt my breath hitch. The look in his eyes was different now, darker, filled with something unspoken. I quickly averted my gaze, pretending to be busy as I helped Lauren prepare the horses. My hands trembled slightly as I brushed down the mare, the familiar rhythm of the task doing little to calm the storm inside me. We rode together for a while, the three of us. Lauren chattered on about something she'd seen online, her voice light and carefree as if nothing in the world was wrong. But every time Ethan's horse moved closer to mine, I could feel the tension crackling between us. It was like a live wire, buzzing beneath the surface, ready to ignite at any moment. At one point, Lauren rode ahead, her horse moving swiftly along the trail as she called out for us to catch up. I held back, deliberately slowing my horse, wanting to put as much distance between Ethan and me as possible. But Ethan didn't let that happen. He guided his horse alongside mine, his gaze steady and intense. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but firm. I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. "There's nothing to talk about," I muttered, urging my horse forward, but Ethan reached out, gently catching my arm. "There's everything to talk about," he insisted. His touch was warm, sending a shiver down my spine, and I hated how easily my body responded to him. "You can't keep avoiding this, Anna. We need to figure out what's happening between us." I pulled my arm away, my heart racing. "What's happening is a mistake," I snapped, though the words felt hollow even as I said them. Ethan's expression softened, and for a moment, he looked almost vulnerable. "Do you really believe that?" he asked quietly. "Because I don't. I've never felt anything like this before, not with anyone." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to deny it, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that we were just caught up in a moment of weakness. But I couldn't. Deep down, I knew exactly what he meant. I felt it too, the intensity, the connection that seemed to draw us together no matter how hard I tried to resist. But that didn't make it any less wrong. "I can't do this," I whispered, shaking my head. "Not to Lauren. She doesn't deserve this." Ethan's jaw tightened, and he looked away, the tension between us thick enough to suffocate. "You're right," he said after a long pause. "She doesn't. But I can't stop thinking about you, Anna. I don't know how to." His confession left me speechless, my heart pounding in my chest. I had never imagined that someone like Ethan, someone so confident, so sure of himself, could feel this way about me. But it didn't change the fact that we were playing with fire, and sooner or later, someone was going to get burned. Before I could respond, Lauren's voice called out from ahead, breaking the moment. "Hey, you two. What's taking so long?" Ethan shot me one last look, a mixture of frustration and longing in his eyes, before urging his horse forward to catch up with her. I stayed behind, my mind spinning as I watched him ride away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with thoughts of Ethan, of Lauren, of everything we'd said. I felt like I was drowning in guilt, and yet, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The way he looked at me, the way he touched me, it was like nothing I had ever experienced before. And that scared me more than anything. The next morning, I tried to avoid him again, but it was no use. Lauren had planned another day of riding, and I couldn't come up with a good enough excuse to stay behind. So I found myself back at the stables, my heart heavy as I saddled up my horse. Ethan was quieter today, more reserved. He didn't try to talk to me, didn't push for answers, but I could feel his eyes on me every time I turned around. It was as if we were both walking on eggshells, waiting for something to break. We rode in silence for most of the day, the tension between us growing with every passing minute. I knew it was only a matter of time before we snapped, before something happened that we couldn't take back. And then, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, it did. We had stopped for a break near the edge of a small clearing, the soft glow of the sunset casting everything in a warm, golden light. Lauren had wandered off to take some photos, leaving Ethan and me alone by the horses. For a few minutes, we stood in silence, the air between us thick with unspoken words. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my hands trembling as I fiddled with the reins. I knew what was coming, and yet I couldn't seem to stop it. "I can't do this anymore," Ethan said suddenly, his voice raw and filled with emotion. "I can't keep pretending like everything's fine when it's not. I'm losing my mind, Anna." I swallowed hard, my throat tight with emotion. "Ethan," he stepped closer, his eyes locking onto mine. "Tell me you don't feel it too," he whispered, his voice pleading. "Tell me this isn't driving you crazy." I couldn't, because it was. Ethan's words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. I stood there, frozen, every fiber of my being screaming at me to walk away, to put an end to this before it spiraled out of control. But I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the ground, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared back at him. "I don't know what to do anymore," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't supposed to happen." Not like this. Ethan took another step toward me, closing the distance between us until I could feel the heat radiating from his body. Maybe it's not supposed to, he said softly, but that doesn't mean it isn't real. His hand reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. The simple touch sent a shiver through me, my resolve crumbling with every passing second. I knew I should stop this, knew that crossing this line meant there would be no turning back. But my mind was clouded with desire, and the more I tried to fight it, the stronger it became. "We can't," I started, but the words died in my throat as Ethan's hand cupped my cheek, his thumb brushing lightly across my skin. My breath hitched, and I felt myself leaning into his touch, the guilt and hesitation slowly fading into the background. For a moment, everything else disappeared. There was no Lauren, no consequences, no reality. It was just me and Ethan, standing there in the soft glow of the setting sun, lost in the intensity of the moment. And then, before I could stop myself, I closed the distance between us, pressing my lips to his in a kiss that was both desperate and undeniable. It wasn't soft or hesitant like the first time. It was filled with all the frustration, longing, and desire that had been building between us for weeks. Ethan responded immediately, his arms wrapping around me, pulling me closer as the kiss deepened. My heart raced, my body trembling as the last of my resistance melted away. All I could think about was how right it felt to be in his arms, how much I had wanted this, even when I knew I shouldn't. But just as quickly as the moment began, reality came crashing back in. I pulled away, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath, the weight of what we had just done settling over me like a lead blanket. We can't do this," I gasped, stepping back, my hands trembling as I wiped at my lips. "This isn't right." Ethan looked at me, his expression torn between frustration and something else, something I couldn't quite place. "I know," he said quietly, "but that doesn't change how I feel." I shook my head, tears stinging the corners of my eyes. "Lauren is my best friend, Ethan. She trusts me. How can we do this to her?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't have all the answers, Anna. I just know that I can't keep pretending this doesn't exist between us." I turned away, unable to look at him any longer. My heart was a tangled mess of guilt, desire, and confusion, and I had no idea how to unravel it. All I knew was that I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross, and the weight of that was crushing. Lauren's voice called out from a distance, and I quickly wiped at my eyes, forcing a smile as I turned back to face her. "Come on, you too. You're missing the best part of the sunset." Ethan gave me a long, searching look before turning to follow her. I hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath before falling in step behind them. The sunset was beautiful, the sky awash with hues of pink and orange, but all I could think about was the storm brewing inside me. The days that followed were a blur of conflicting emotions. I tried to avoid Ethan as much as possible, but it was hard when we were constantly thrown together. Lauren was completely oblivious to the tension between us, and that only made the guilt worse. Every time I saw her smile, every time she laughed and joked with Ethan like nothing was wrong, I felt a fresh wave of shame wash over me. How could I do this to her? How could I betray her trust like this? I avoided being alone with Ethan, but it didn't stop the stolen glances, the lingering touches that made my heart race. It was a dangerous game we were playing, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. One evening, after another long day of writing, Lauren suggested we all have dinner at her place. I didn't want to go. I knew it would be impossible to sit through a meal with the two of them without feeling like I was suffocating under the weight of my guilt. But I couldn't come up with a good excuse, so I reluctantly agreed. As the evening wore on, I found myself retreating into silence, barely able to focus on the conversation around me. Lauren and Ethan were laughing and joking, their easy banter a stark contrast to the turmoil swirling inside me. I excused myself to the kitchen under the pretense of getting more wine, but in reality, I just needed a moment to breathe. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, and I needed to get away from the reminder of what I had done. I was leaning against the counter, staring blankly at the bottle of wine in my hand, when I felt someone enter the kitchen behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know it was Ethan. "Anna." His voice was low, cautious. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. "We can't keep doing this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's not fair to her." Ethan was silent for a moment before stepping closer. "I know," he admitted, "but it's killing me. Being around you, pretending like nothing's changed. I don't know how much longer I can do it. I turned to face him, my chest tight with the weight of his words. We have to stop, I whispered, my heart breaking even as I said the words. This isn't just about us, Ethan. This is about Lauren. She's my best friend. I can't hurt her like this. His jaw clenched, his eyes dark with frustration. I don't want to hurt her either, he said quietly. But what about us? What am I supposed to do with these feelings, Anna? I didn't have an answer for him. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living with this guilt, couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine when it wasn't. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to find the strength to walk away from him. Before I could respond, Lauren's voice called out from the other room, cheerful and oblivious. Anna? Ethan? What's taking so long? Ethan shot me a look filled with both longing and frustration before stepping back. We should go, he said, his voice tight. Before she gets suspicious, I nodded, forcing a smile as I followed him back to the dining room, the weight of our unspoken words hanging heavy between us. The tension between Ethan and me had reached a breaking point, but I still couldn't bring myself to confront it. Lauren continued to live in blissful ignorance, unaware of the emotional storm that was tearing me apart. I didn't know how much longer I could keep up the facade. The guilt was suffocating, yet every time I tried to distance myself from Ethan, it felt like something was pulling me back. It was a few days later when everything finally started to unravel. We were at the stables again, just like any other day. Lauren was busy with her horse, talking animatedly about some event she wanted to attend that weekend. I half listened, my attention constantly flickering to Ethan, who was saddling his horse a few feet away. He caught my eye, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. His gaze lingered, filled with the same intensity that had haunted me for weeks. I quickly looked away, my heart pounding in my chest, but I could feel the weight of his stare even after I turned my back. I tried to distract myself by focusing on my horse, but it was no use. The tension between Ethan and me was palpable, a constant presence that loomed over every interaction. It was only a matter of time before something snapped. That afternoon, as we rode together, Lauren rode ahead once again, her carefree laughter echoing through the trees. I kept my distance, determined to avoid any more private moments with Ethan. But he had other plans. He guided his horse closer to mine, his expression serious. Anna, we need to talk. I told you, there's nothing to talk about, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. We can't keep doing this. Ethan frowned, clearly frustrated. You can't keep pretending like nothing happened. We kissed, Anna, twice. I flinched at the reminder. It was a mistake. No, he said firmly, his eyes locking onto mine. It wasn't. I opened my mouth to argue, but the words caught in my throat. As much as I wanted to deny it, deep down, I knew he was right. There was something between us, something I couldn't explain or ignore, but acknowledging it would only lead to disaster. Before I could respond, Lauren's voice interrupted us, calling out from up ahead. Hey, slowpokes, you're falling behind. I quickly urged my horse forward, desperate to escape the conversation. But even as I caught up with Lauren, the weight of Ethan's words lingered, pressing down on me like a vice. That evening, after we returned from the stables, Lauren suggested we have dinner at a nearby restaurant. I reluctantly agreed, still shaken from the conversation with Ethan. I didn't trust myself to be around him, but avoiding him would only raise Lauren's suspicions. As we sat at the table, I could barely focus on the conversation. Lauren was chatting away, her voice cheerful and oblivious, as she recounted a funny story from work. Ethan, on the other hand, was unusually quiet, his eyes occasionally flickering to mine with a look I couldn't quite decipher. The tension between us was suffocating, and I knew Lauren could sense it. She gave me a puzzled look once or twice, but I forced a smile and pretended everything was fine. I wasn't ready to explain what was really going on. I didn't even know how to put it into words. Midway through the meal, Lauren excused herself to go to the restroom, leaving Ethan and me alone at the table. The silence between us was deafening, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I can't keep doing this, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the clinking of dishes in the restaurant. We have to stop. Ethan leaned forward, his expression serious. I know, but it's not that simple, is it? I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. I don't know what to do. He reached across the table, his hand brushing lightly against mine. We'll figure it out. But even as he said the words, I knew there was no easy solution. We were trapped in a web of lies and deceit, and no matter how much we wanted to, we couldn't entangle ourselves without hurting Lauren. When she returned to the table, smiling and laughing like everything was normal, I felt a fresh wave of guilt wash over me. I couldn't keep doing this to her. She deserved better than this. It wasn't long after that night that the inevitable happened. Lauren wasn't stupid. She could sense something was off, even if she didn't know what it was. The cracks in the foundation of our friendship were starting to show, and it was only a matter of time before everything crumbled. A few days later, we were back at the stables. Lauren had been quieter than usual, and I knew something was wrong. I could feel the tension radiating off her as we brushed down the horses, the air between us thick with unspoken words. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes filled with suspicion and hurt. Anna, what's going on? I froze, my heart dropping into my stomach. What do you mean? She crossed her arms over her chest, her expression hardening. You've been acting weird for weeks. And Ethan, he's been acting strange too. I'm not stupid, Anna. Something's going on between you two, isn't there? The blood drained from my face. I opened my mouth to deny it, to lie, but the words wouldn't come. My silence spoke volumes. Lauren's eyes filled with tears as she realized the truth. Oh my God, she whispered, her voice shaking. How could you? How could you do this to me? I'm sorry, I whispered, my own voice breaking. I didn't mean for this to happen. But it did, she snapped, her hands trembling as she wiped at her eyes. You were supposed to be my best friend. I trusted you. The pain in her voice was unbearable, and I felt a fresh wave of shame wash over me. I had hurt her in the worst possible way, and there was no undoing it. Lauren turned away from me, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I reached out to comfort her, but she flinched away, her voice cold and distant. Just leave me alone, Anna. I can't even look at you right now. I wanted to say something, anything, to make it better, but I knew there was nothing I could do. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. In the days that followed, Lauren barely spoke to me. The once easy, carefree friendship we had shared was gone, replaced by an awkward silence that hung heavy between us. She avoided me at every opportunity, and when we were forced to be in the same space, she barely acknowledged my presence. Ethan, too, was distant. The guilt and shame we both felt had driven a wedge between us, and even though we had never discussed it, we both knew that whatever had been between us was over. There was no happy ending here. No neat resolution that would make everything right again. I had betrayed Lauren in the worst possible way, and I couldn't take it back. The trust between us had been shattered, and no matter how much time passed, I knew it would never be the same. In the quiet moments, when I was alone with my thoughts, I found myself wondering how things might have been different if I had just walked away from Ethan that first day at the stables. If I had resisted the pull I felt toward him, maybe none of this would have happened. But it was too late for what-ifs. The damage had been done. As the weeks passed, I slowly started to come to terms with the reality of what had happened. Lauren and I had grown apart, and though she never officially ended our friendship, the distance between us became insurmountable. We drifted away from each other, two people who had once been inseparable, now strangers. And Ethan, well, he became just another regret.